Welcome, fellow wizards, to the Indie Game Lunch Hour. Today we're talking with Joe Casava, the CEO, designer, and engineer at Puzzles by Joe, about the $6 million franchise, lessons from 14 years as a solopreneur.
The Indie Game Lunch Hour.
Welcome, everybody. In our live magical podcast, we give game developers the chance to hear stories of breaking in from industry experts, as well as directly ask them questions about their areas of expertise in the second half of each episode. This is a mostly unedited recording of a weekly event we host here in our Discord on every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, so feel free to swing by and join next time and ask your own questions live. I'm your host, Willa Delmenthal, headmaster of the Indie Game Academy and the self-proclaimed Wizard of Joy, and joining me today is Joe Casava, who is indeed the CEO, designer, engineer, and everything else at Puzzles by Joe, who has been working for himself as an indie dev for quite some time and has a lot to say about making that work. Joe, welcome to the show. What are you having for lunch today?
I've already eaten my lunch, actually. I had a turkey sandwich.
Incredible. Most people have not actually consumed or will consume. The answer I get most often is, coffee?
Yeah, well, I have my Diet Mountain Dew here.
Amazing.
My breakfast of champions.
Is that your caffeine source of choice?
Yes. Yes. When people ask me if I want coffee, I say I take my coffee cold and green.
Interesting. Does that give you like Hulkian superpowers or anything?
No.
No. Dang it. I am definitely a hot bean juice kind of guy. I love me some coffee on really any day. Well, welcome to the show, Joe. This is, I think, going to be one of the more interesting episodes. If you look up Joe Casava, you will find what looks like a blast from the past. Like we've just stepped into the 90s and we're playing a bunch of old school games. And that's because Joe has been working for himself now for over 14 years. And a lot of his work is a little bit more retro. But as a result of this retro work, he has managed to, well, you can correct me on that if you wish. A lot of his work has managed to self-sustain himself over this period of time, and he has now, as suggested by the title, made over $6 million with his Clutter franchise. So I would love to hear from you, Joe, how you got started and how you got to where you are today. Tell us your origin story.
Sure. So first, a few things to clear up. So number one, the franchise is called Clutter. And I do have some old school games that I did from 97 to 2000 that were more like Windows desktop games, and they were logic puzzle things. But this Clutter game started in 2011, back after hidden object games became really big. Just historically, I worked for a company called iWin back in 2004, not 19. 2004, and in about 2005, the world discovered that women will in fact play games if they're the right kind of games. And there was a thing called the casual market that boomed. And one of the biggest players in the casual market was Big Fish Games, and I worked for one of the other companies that became big called iWin. And then there's a company called Game House, which came out of Real Networks for all the old school people. And they're all still around distributing these casual games. And I did Mahjong Quest 3. I did a trilogy of Mahjong Quest games for iWin from between 2005 and 2009. And then the market tightened up a little bit. And I had pitched several projects, and we won't get into that too much in detail, but they finally half greenlit one, and after it was about halfway done, a couple other games bombed as the market got tighter, and they pulled the plug on my game. And my future wife turned to me and said, can you do this on your own? And I said, well, no, not really the game I had in mind, but I can do something. And I decided to give the PC casual download market a shot. And I hate games that you play once and you're done. So hidden object games were crossed with light adventure at the time. And the hidden object game is this game where you go into a room and it's got a bunch of objects, but there's a list down at the bottom, like a basketball or a broom or whatever, and you find it. It's like the old I Spy games, and
For like a Where's Waldo.
correct. A little wish where Wild was a more modern version of this type. But yes, this was Highlights Magazine. If you ever been to the dentist way back in the day, that's magazines for kids have these things called I Spy, where again, you get a picture and a list of things, and you're supposed to find them. Well, I wanted to do a non-verbal version of that was replayable, and that's what I did. And at the time, I knew the market well enough that I thought I would make either over 100,000 for that, or less than 10,000, and if it bombed, because I knew I would get at least 100,000 eyeballs, and as long as I had a decent enough conversion rate, that's what I figured I would do. And to give you some perspective, before the market shrunk, those Mahjong Quest games, made a few million for iWin. And that's why I said, well, maybe I can do this on my own and so forth, right? So, but the market had tightened up a little bit, and the market ended up proving me wrong. I took a man-year to do the first Clutter game, and after 15 months, it had only made about $50,000. And which isn't good for me. I wanted 100,000 per man-year, at least for what I was doing at the time, and this is in 2011.
Yeah, I imagine that wasn't easy to self-sustain off of. And that's 50,000. Is that 50,000 gross or net as well?
That's net. That's net. In fact, what I want to clear out is first of all, the $6 million is sales. My net is about $2 million in the 13 plus years now. So if you do all the average, I'm making about 150K a year sustainable now.
I mean, not bad. Yeah.
Yeah, it's slightly better than working for somebody else. So anyways, I almost did not do Clutter 2. And but I figured, since I already had the engine written, I could do Clutter 2 in about half the man-year time. I took a part-time job here in Atlanta. I live in the Atlanta area with a gambling company, a slots company, to hedge my bets a little bit. And it took me a full year to get out the second game. But I was right. The second game ended up doing about the same as the first. But then I learned something. They actually bumped sales to the first one. So if I had never done a second game, if all I ever did was Clutter and walked away, that game might have made about 60,000 for me over the course of the dwindling long tail. It has now made $250,000 for me.
Wow.
Each game I put out gets me about a 40K bump in a couple months. My soft income is about 10 to 12,000 a month. And that's from all the old game, from all Clutter 1 through, I just put out 15. I'm going to put out 16 in a little bit. And over time, I've really nurtured both my audience and whatever. And I had to fight back at Clutter 1 to get the games, even on the site and taken seriously and given extra marketing. But now they go right to number 1 on Big Fish. I'm permanently on the page at Gamehouse. I was the top hidden object game of 2023 on Big Fish. Gamehouse has me permanently on their front page, and they wouldn't take Clutter 1 or 2. And I sort of insulted them, then I apologized to them, and now they just love me. In fact, they did a mobile port of one of my games of Killer Clutter, which I split development costs, but they did all the work. So that was kind of free money. And it didn't do great, but it did good in traction, but it couldn't quite get the downloads and so forth. But anyways, what happens is every Clutter that goes out makes that chunk, but it also keeps the franchise alive. If I got hit by a truck today, knock on wood, I would still bring in between 200,000 to 300,000 over the next 2 or 3 years before it finally, tailed off. It's just what would happen. So, anyway, so that's my story, and
it's fascinating. I mean, I think it is there's a couple of things here that I think are brand new. Every time we talk to somebody, there's new lessons that we learn, and there's always some stuff that's similar. The part where you go, I wonder if I could do this for myself. That's something that everybody has. But the way that you approach this, and specifically, I think the way that you notice that your long tail brings in more revenue to older games, and therefore, maybe if I just keep pumping out games in this franchise, I can actually self-sustain. That one's new. I haven't really heard of somebody using that approach as a solopreneur yet, as a solo game developer. And even more so, I think it's a wonderful example of like classic solopreneur grit. You went, oh shit, this is not making me enough money. You pivoted a little bit. You took a job for a time period to make sure that you were bringing something in, but you took a second shot despite the fact that the first game didn't make that much money. You said, okay, let me at least bet a second time. And then you noticed something that still was a traditional success, but alluded to a different way for you to make money.
Right. And it wasn't, so I just want to be clear. So I knew I could do the second game in a man 6 months instead of a year. Even though it took a year, it was a man 6 month of time. Now, making $50,000 for a man 6 months was my target. Okay. So I knew that was a safe bet, actually. And I knew I didn't have a huge hit. I just had a medium hit. And the good thing about having a medium hit, it's probably reproducible. Much more than if you caught lightning or something, right? And what happened was a few months after that went out, I saw the initial chunk. I knew it was going to make 50,000, but it bumped 20,000 to the other game. So all of a sudden, this 6 months worth of effort is really made 70K. Now I'm off to the races, but the market keeps shrinking. So what I argued at the time is that basically my franchise effect keeps me ahead of the ever shrinking market curve. There was a couple years ago, about 6 or 7 years ago, I thought I was going to hit, break that 200K for really good and go to closer to 300K. And that didn't happen. But this year coming up, I might come close because over time, I finally got rid of the story. The current games are now called Clutter Puzzle Magazine. I put this last game's going out in about 4 man months worth of work, which means I get 3 chunks a year, which means I'm going to be closer to 250K at least. And it might be higher. I'm also doing something in mobile this year with another guy that might bring, 50, 60, 70K to me semi-reliably without much effort. And by the way, the longer I stuck around, there's a guy that's ported the games they're on Switch now, they're on PlayStation 4 and 5. They don't make much over there, but it didn't cost me any time. And that's all I care about is my time. And one last thing I say, I have been able to keep my true indie creative juices going throughout this. I don't just crank out the same game over and over and over again. In fact, not now, but in a little bit, I want to read you a quote from one of my favorite fans.
Okay, let's do that. Yeah, let's do that in just a second. I would love to hear that. Yeah. So here's my main curiosity here. This is definitely interesting. It's also, I think, a great, maybe an alternate. I mean, there are, of course, a lot of indie developers out there that know that releasing multiple games in a series is valuable in a number of different ways, including that you get sales on originals in the series. But I think, the extent to which you've taken this, you're now on, was it the 15th game you just released?
15th just released and 16th's coming up.
Yeah, you're now on the 15th.
And they're really different. And by the way, I do want to interject. So I give talks and stuff. And at first I really downplayed that Clutter was special. Okay? It's really nonverbal hidden object. It's just truly this thing called a hog pile that already existed before me, where you just have a bunch of objects on a screen and you have to pick out the 2 that are the same. There's a thing called Match 3D on the phone that's pretty popular right now that came out of Clutter. Clutter's created its own subgenre of hidden object. They now consider its own genre because they make there's a distinction between hidden object and hidden object part adventure. And there's many, many clones of mine that aren't considered as good, but it's still the basic idea. And anyway, so when I would tell people, ideas are a dime a dozen. It's the execution that matters and all this, right? But there's one piece of a genius idea that I do tell people now to make, young game devs think. The genius idea of Clutter is two things. I wanted to make a replayable. I hate games that when you're done, you're done. So I wanted it replayable. I want it like Sudoku. I want it randomly generated based on parameters and so forth. But I saw a game that already existed that was just a tiny, tiny part of some hidden object games. And I said, that is a space worth exploring on its own. And I've been proven, I mean, seriously, each Clutter game has new stuff that's still Clutter, but it's stretching what I can do. And 8 years ago, I switched to Unity, which opened up a whole new, under the old system that I wrote, the Mahjong Quest, it was very static. Couldn't do a lot of motion, couldn't do a lot of stuff that I could do in Unity, Unity made me 5 times faster and let me do things I couldn't do under my old development system. So
super fascinating. I would love to hear, I think there's 2 things. I would love to hear that quote from a fan of yours.
Sure.
And I would also love to hear your sort of like 101 to the beginners. So people who are thinking about game development, but also definitely solo development, because there are definitely a good number of people who just don't want to deal with other people and they want to work on their own stuff. What are your words of wisdom from your own experience here? What are your lessons?
So I'm going to give you 2 real quick ones.
All right.
And I'm going to read this real quick just so we don't forget it and slip. So
let's do it.
This is from one of my better, so I had people playing Clutter that have played it for 10 years now, 10 plus years, and they play it over an hour or 2 a day. They play it like I play Free Cell. It's their game they love. And this is what one of them said. You know what you'll get with each Clutter game. It's always the same, yet each game is always different. That's the magic of the Clutter series. Okay. Now, as to your other question, so if anybody goes to my Puzzles by Joe website and then goes to the other or whatever, you'll see a section that you can go to called Joe's Videos. And I gave a talk a few years ago called How to Succeed in Anything If Oprah, Deepak, and Tony Robbins were game devs. And it was basically, it's what you just asked. It's what is my advice for people, getting into things. And it is tough to really compress it, but it's basically read tons, keep improving, and do this thing I call the lottery ticket of time. Okay? My mantra is everything you do is in preparation for a future path you can't predict. So if that's true, instead of Netflixing and chilling, maybe you ought to be learning something new. And I say when you use your time wisely in the present, you're buying a lottery ticket. And you don't know when or whether it'll ever pay off, but it might. Down the road, you have the right piece of information to do something that somebody else can't do or whatever that you want to do, and that pays off. And Clutter for me was not only a lottery ticket of time itself, but it paid off. And it's paid off so much that I'm really at the point now, I know I'm going to make $200K a year for at least the next 2 or 3 with just doing what I'm doing without working without luck, put it that way, sustainable.
Yeah. That's amazing, which that is also one of the biggest struggles for solo or just indie game developers. Sustainability. You can have a hit, but even after having a hit, a lot of solo companies and indie companies fall apart, or at least just have a hard time chasing the success. So what was that? Did I miss it? What was the second one? You said you had two tips.
Did I say 2 tips?
I thought you said 2. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, the lottery ticket of time works into the, I think the 2 was the realizing everything you do is in preparation for a future path you can't predict. You should basically you should use your time wisely. And buying a ticket, when I used to give the example, it was, read a book, learn a new skill, finish something, show. I used to say to young people, have a game. You need to show them, to get a job, you need to show them a game. but that's not definitely enough anymore. You need a portfolio. It's very tough in the industry right now. And actually places like yours where you're an alternative to straight college, correct?
Pretty much, yeah.
I think that's the wave of the future for at least game dev, and it's tough. I hate, game dev is more than just coding. Mm-hmm. But I'm a coder at heart, and everything else I've just learned as I need it. Oh, and by the way, I created Clutter to cost nothing. I had a bunch of photorealistic objects from a Hamera photo CD set, 30 years ago. And I wrote them, it was before digital stuff. And I wrote them, said, can I use it? And they said, yes. And I was off and running. And I used to get my music from Partners in Rhyme. I now get it from Artlist.io. I do all my interface now. I used to occasionally farm out to an artist, but I've learned enough from the artist to I can at least do a halfway decent user interface now, that looks a little polished. Some people still complain, that my games do look, retro. Mm-hmm. I don't think, again, I'm not sure which games you looked at and whether you looked at the first Clutter or the current Clutter or whatever, but if you go to my website and just watch the video, I don't think it looks that retro. It's flat. It's flat because that's what I chose. So even the people that push me to go to the phone, want 3D objects and this, and I'm like, nah, it gets in. Clutter works because of the flat, because of what the objects are.
Things don't stand out in the same way as a 3D object would.
Correct, and they're not all cartoony. I do have some cartoony thing. I mean, I have a real mix, but even the photorealistic objects, I do this thing called close counts, where I'll have three of the same object, but they're all slightly different. Mm-hmm. And some are things like, well, that's an umbrella, and there's a black one and a blue one and a green one, versus, oh, that's 3 different pictures of a desk, the same desk from a different angle. Mm-hmm. And all those.
There's a lot here. Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot here that I want to try to pull out. So I have a couple of lessons that I feel like I'm identifying for the masses, the listeners. Sure. So tell me if you agree with these or if you have modifications to them. Sure. I think there's a couple things. One, I think you're just being really smart budgeting wise. And that's basically what you just told me. I knew that this thing could make money, and I knew that I could do it with basically zero cost, just my time. Right. Which not only is that, like, of course, valuable. I don't need to pay an artist or whoever else to do stuff for me. But the other part of that that's really interesting is it makes your formula for success much more clear. What you've been talking about this whole time is just like, did my man hours equal enough money for the time period? Which is essentially what the revenue formula is for every company. It just gets a lot more complicated because you have so many other expenses getting in the way.
Of course, yeah.
And here you're just like, well, if I make $50,000 in 6 months, success. And I love how nice and straightforward that is.
Correct.
Yeah.
And by the way, there's, one of my mantras is, there's more than one way to skin a cat, right? Mm-hmm. I didn't make the game for me. This is not my game, my favorite game, my whatever. I made it so I enjoy it. But I said, how do I make money in this field that's lucrative? When I worked at iWin in the Mahjong, I hated so much the death by committee and then shooting down ideas and shooting ideas. When I really believe the proof is in the pudding, it's the execution, right? Mm-hmm. And I kept telling them, at one point I was saying, you pick the genre and I'll write you a decent game. Okay? And that never happened. So when I went on my own, I went, well, what's the most popular genre in the casual market that I'm going to hit? Well, it's hidden object games. Okay, well, I want to do one, but I don't want to do story and gorgeous art. I can't do that. So I want it replayable again, and that's what I did. And by the way, the first few games, I spent way too much time on mini games that I was the only one that cared about, because the first couple games had a more normal story. I threw that out with game 3, where I started. The story was game dev, was would you rather play I really stacked the deck. Would you rather play a beautiful, boring game or an ugly, addicting game? Mm-hmm. And I stacked it. And I told this story about a game dev, and I started talking about me a lot. And then the stories of the games became more and more about meta. And I became my own brand and my own... They feel like some of the players that are really hardcore feel like I'm chatting with them. I'm right there playing with them. So much so that now in games I mentioned that that's how I feel when I'm programming, that they're on my mind while I'm programming. And I've got about 2,000 people that have made it to my website, even though I can't have clicks in the game. There's just been a branding of Joe Casava and Clutter. And if you search, not Joe, but Puzzles by Joe and Clutter, if you search for you'll find me. And a lot of them buy directly. I now sell about 16,000 direct in sales every year. So
super interesting. Here's my last question. We've got a couple community questions that I would love to get to in a second. But before then, my biggest question, it feels to me like the unique factor. There's a couple of unique factors to Joe and Puzzles by Joe. And that is one, micro budget. As much as possible, you're reducing cost and everything. Definitely franchise over totally new concepts. But then also within the franchise, you are like pushing the boundaries and experimenting a little bit. It seems like one of your design pillars is recognizable. I can pick it up and play it. I can play the first game and then I'll play the 14th game and I'll still understand the 14th game. I won't need to relearn it, but there'll be something fresh.
And they get harder.
And they get harder.
Consistently, I push them to get harder, and I wouldn't say, let's put it as weirder. So much so that some of the early fans have bailed, but not many. And most just love it, that it keeps getting slightly harder and more challenging for them.
Yeah. So then my question is, if those are sort of the core DNA of Puzzles by Joe, what of that do you recommend to others? Do you recommend everybody do a franchise approach? Or do you recommend everybody do a micro budget approach? Or everybody do a solopreneur approach? Or do you have qualifications for when you recommend those things?
I don't know. What's really tough is if you started out today with the way the casual market shrunk, I'd be in trouble. One of the biggest things I did was I picked this market because I didn't have to market. And that's no longer true. Like Big Fish won't even talk to new developers anymore, I don't think. And there's that problem because they're sort of filled. There's a glut of games and they're not as good. One of the pluses, so before I forget it, the biggest problem for any game dev is how are you going to get seen? Before you write a line of code, you better answer that question. And I had that question answered because I knew I was going to get 100,000 eyeballs. I knew it. I knew it would go on the site, and at the time, that's what would happen. And if I got a good enough conversion rate, I'd be okay. Which is what happened. So, but now you can't even, the clones that clone me, they don't make it in the top 10. They don't make much money. They don't have the sustainability that I have. And I used to say, make your game, try to get, my advice for young people right now is find a job that will pay you to perfect your skills so that once you really know what's going on, you can make it. I didn't start till I was 52 down this solopreneur. Get somebody else to pay you to master your skills. And then once you have that, then take an educated risk and, do something else.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. I feel like I am like relearning that lesson. It's interesting being a teacher. You have probably felt this way, during talks and instructing other people. Like there's so many lessons that I know, and then I will teach other people, and then I don't employ myself because I don't know. We're humans, I guess. Comes with the belly button. Right. And I feel like that right now. I am doing a full-time day job as a developer, as well as the Indie Game Academy here, and it can be a lot. It's been a lot lately. And I have been feeling like one of the things that I have started to recommend is focus a little bit more on just one thing at a time. It's okay for, it's still progress towards solopreneurship or starting your own studio to work for somebody else for a couple of years and do nothing on your project. in that time period, because you're learning,
sure.
developing, you're creating connections, you're also just putting money in the bank. There's a lot of the ways that that's actually contributing to a future success in the indie field. So I love that you didn't start until you're 52, because just I feel like let's everybody take a little deep breath.
well, I actually started earlier and failed. I worked for a company that got bought out by AOL, and I ended up with funny money. I won the lottery for real.
Wow.
And I didn't work for 3.5 years. I made 9 games, these old little window pop-up games, and I couldn't figure out how to get anybody to my website. I even paid a click farm like $800, and then I fought them so much after the little response I got that my credit card company made them give me the money back. Okay? But anyways, I made literally zero money in 3.5 years because I was living off this other stuff. And wow. I had a brilliant idea one day. I looked at it and I went, if I can't get people to my website to buy my 9 games, making my 10th one isn't the smartest move. And that's when I ended up going back and doing Mahjong quests for a big games company.
Wow.
A big enough games company. That was my first real pipeline, at bigger game dev.
Yeah, just for everybody who doesn't know this stat, this is a really simple one. Founders with prior industry experience working for somebody else are about 2 times as likely to actually succeed. So even if you're like, you're super hungry, to get started, it still makes sense to go work for somebody else, because you're going to make mistakes on their project. That's really the big thing. And you're going to make a bunch of connections and all kinds of other value out of it. But I
couldn't even have done it without. So when I left iWin, I did a deal where I stayed 2 months longer to help them do something so that I could have, they had right of first refusal, but I could use the tools I'd built while at iWin to go do my own stuff.
Brilliant.
And I couldn't have, I didn't want to start that from scratch.
So you built the tools you needed to start a company on somebody else's dime.
So I refined them. Somebody else built them, but I actually refined them. I was a performance specialist, among other things. And I had sped up their main framework by a factor of 10 twice, and then still another factor of 2. I mean, it was just ridiculous, the stuff I was finding and improving. And then, yes, I was allowed to take all that with me. So
brilliant. All right. Yeah. So I have taken enough of your time. We have a couple of community questions. And actually, this first one, I think, is what basically all indie devs wonder. Zach is on stage, Zachary. Zachary also says, by the way, that they really want your life, Joe. So you two can negotiate that if you want.
Okay.
But Zachary, would you like to ask your question?
Just tear off half of the lottery ticket for me, Joe. That's all I'm asking for. No, so at the top, you were mentioning how, you kind of found this niche and how, I guess games weren't really focused on finding female audiences for a very long time. And that's kind of where, I don't know if you really settled into that, but you kind of found an audience there. And I'm really curious about how, when you thought of who your prospective audience might be for your games, how did you actually go out and find players?
So again, just like marketing, I didn't have to find players. So there was a thing called the casual market that boomed. You can look it up, casual PC market. Look up Big Fish's story. But in about 2004, there were some websites selling casual download games, but not that many. Mahjong was a big one that did okay, and that's why we did one. And the 3-ball match hadn't hit yet. And Bejeweled did, but it hadn't hit big. And the first thing iWin did was a game called Jewel Quest, which Jewel Quest is actually the game that links Bejeweled with Candy Crush. Jewel Quest added the strategic factor that you had to get a match on every square and turn that square to gold to go on. And it was brilliant. And that game, made 25 million. And I was the redheaded stepchild. I tell people my Mahjong Quest games, made 15 million. Okay. But at the time, nobody knew how big that market was going to be. The iWin was just making a couple games, but once they saw how strong that was, they became their own portal. They switched, they pivoted, they still created games, but they became a portal, because becoming a portal was the way to really make money. Not just put out your own games, put out everybody's games. And back then the games were $20, and then they got cut in half, and then back again. it's a long story, but huge amounts, again, millions. A game would sit at the top of the, quote, what we call the internet of casual games for 6 weeks to, 6 to 8 weeks. Now they spend, a week at the most, a few days. And back then, that's how they made it, because he had that many customers. What happened, though, is after, every Christmas, mobile phones. More and more people leaving the desktop. And that audience, by the way, was women over 40. This is how we described it. Women over 40 with some disposable income. That's the target market. I believe Clutter can, everybody can play it, but that was our target market.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I think a takeaway there's definitely, it is something that I feel like I get a lot of the time, an answer that we hear on this podcast a lot of the time when somebody has worked in games for a really long time is, well, back then it was a little easier because, it just wasn't as big of a market yet. And that, of course, is true. But I would also say that there's still lessons that people can take out of it. What it sounds like you did to me is, number one, you identified an underserved market. One of the examples we love talking about here is Stardew Valley. Stardew Valley is basically a clone of Harvest Moon with a couple extra features and made by one dude, so we kind of love that story. We love the solopreneur story. But still, it's just Harvest Moon, but it was an underserved market because Harvest Moon went through this whole legal battle, and all these Harvest Moon players who loved that franchise had been around for like 10 years or something without a new Harvest Moon title. There were... Somebody can remind me what they had to start renaming it, because they literally had to change their name. The name Harvest Moon is now dead. You cannot use it. And then, Concerned Ape came around and dropped Stardew Valley and made $60 million or whatever it was. So I think like you and I win, and then yourself later as a solopreneur simply identified an opening. You were like, here is a group of people that currently aren't already served. And then I think... Yeah.
Correct. And by the way, and what happens is there's a boom and bust. The gold rush happens. Mm-hmm. So people go out and prove there's a lot of money to be made there. And then, all of a sudden a hidden object game came up called Mystery Case Files, which really high production values. And they were spending $250,000 to make a few million back. And a lot of people were doing it. And then it gets glutted, just like the mobile market, just like you can't break the top 10.
It gets cluttered.
It's what happens. Correct. But there's a gold rush at some point. Mm-hmm. And before that gold rush, if you're in at the front end of the gold rush, you're going to do good. Yeah. But if the gold rush has already been there for a year, so you're in trouble. Which is why making a mobile game now without knowing how you're going to get seen isn't the way to go.
Yeah, and I think it's also, it says a lot about like emerging markets now. Like I would say there's not actually that many, and I would love to hear if you feel like there's a couple you could point us to. One of the ones that I feel like we have right now, one of the ones we've talked about for a while is VR. I think VR has already hit the end of its bust for now. It'll bust again. But for now, it's kind of already dead. But the one that's just emerging is the Unreal editor for Fortnite. That seems to be like exploding right now. Yeah,
and I'm not a gamer. I'm a puzzle guy. So I know what that means. I know about Roblox and possibly doing games for the, I don't know. if the channel shows up and ends up good, yeah, but I don't know enough to steer anybody in the Fortnite, direction. And I'm a Unity guy, regardless of the,
all the dumb crap they try to pull.
Right. But they talked about the indie getting, or what do they call it? Not indie Armageddon, but it's for indies.
Somebody can tell us the name of that. I think I know what you're referring to.
But anyways, I think
that's...
Indie-pocalypse, right. Yeah. That's... When it first showed up, I was like, no. And now it's more like it is kind of tough because the tools are so good that people can just clone a stupid game, with no talent, no nothing, whatever. And one other lesson for me is, yes, find your niche that you're good at, and exploit it. And by the way, what I'm good at is randomness. I'm good at randomness and flexibility and really, really exploring a design space. Like if I was going to make a runner, my runner would probably have about 50 knobs that I would let the customer get to. It would all be programmatically generated. and you'd have normal levels that played, that people designed, but you'd also have, blitz mode where, they could just play to death, and if you want to play it more like Sonic, you do it that way. If you want to play slow, and I'd let them get to those controls kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So
super interesting.
Anyways,
yeah, I'm curious what other markets we'll see. I mean, AI is not a market, but that's a tool that like the people who figure out how to use that well will be huge winners in the coming years. But anyway, we got
as
Rick
everybody
on
else
stage.
loses. As
everyone else loses. Oh, it's scary. It's good though. It'll be good. Everything's great. Let's see. So Rick is now on stage. Rick, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I'm curious. You have a series of games. Do you have a specific strategy for linking your player base from one title to the next?
Great question.
No, they're all called Clutter, and they know, and they're already on a distribution channel. So they're either already at Big Fish or Game House or iWin or whatever, and they're going to see the next game there. Very few people switch, okay? And once they see one game, so on Big Fish, there is a link. You go to the game, and it links to the prior game, et cetera, et cetera. And I have a publisher guy who does my games on Steam, and he does the same thing. You go to one of my games on Steam, you see the 5 or 6 below, okay? And my front page of Puzzles by Joe is just the 15 games, and in fact, I gave it, each game has a one sentence expression of why it's different. I kind of ripped off Friends there. So it's, it's the one with the dragging. It's the one with the cute girls. It's the one with, whatever, so forth. So my big thing is to constantly stress how different each game is. And, oh, by the way, and within the game, again, the stories became more and more meta. The last 3 games before this puzzle magazine were actually my self-help talks, my motivation talks. The games before that were the history of Clutter, trying to explain how each game was different. Or, what do you want in a game? What do you want in a game, Deb? And subtle hints. I couldn't have a Puzzle by Joe link in any of my games. The distributors won't let that because they consider it poaching. But I strongly brand, you can find me. I did a couple games ago called Clutter's Greatest Hits, and I pointed them to a video of me on a cruise ship playing a song I wrote. It has weirdly shifted into, Joe plus Clutter and whatever. And some people hate me. Some people think I'm the biggest narcissist in the world because I put myself in the game. But all I did was listen to my customers, keep giving them what they want while still nudging them in the direction I want to develop games in.
Right. So it sounds like you've developed a consistent style of game. You've got your loyal player base, and you just make sure that whatever you're building, you're not changing it so much that you let them down, and then they continue coming back.
And they're super loyal. And even though my customer base is the over 40 women, whatever, I have super smart people that play the game. My reviews on Steam, even though they're few and far between, because I'm not aiming at the RPG, the RPG or the first-person shooter people don't think they're going to like my game. So I get weirdly backhanded compliments like weirdly addictive. I thought this game was going to suck. God, it looked like something out of the 80s. But man, it's addicting. I still believe that I used to have a dream that, not a dream, but that either Oprah or Ellen DeGeneres or somebody would get a hold of my games and play it, and it would just blow up because there is so much there. Oh, and by the way, each game, 1,700 levels in the last few games. There's 100 level main quest, which is enough. It's going to take you 10 hours, but they play my games forever because there's so much to find and explore and so forth. I don't know. And I have a word game in it that people like, so I put that. I put a lot of things. About half the game, each new game is content driven. So I have a bunch of picture puzzle stuff that only matters about the 100 pictures I give them. I have these things called quote box puzzles that take 100 quotes and they work with any quotes. So all I have to do is find 100 new quotes that I like. And I don't know what to... And I'll give a free copy to anybody who emails me, by the way. If you guys want to look it out, look it up.
Go check it out then. I want to call out something that you mentioned about halfway through there. You said, I think like some people, so first of all, you're inserting yourself into the games in some capacity, at least in the marketing content, but also literally in the games, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Some people hate that, but something you said was, I've done a good job of listening to my audience while still pushing them in a direction that I want to develop. And I feel like that is also words of wisdom that basically anybody can listen to. I really do think that game development, game design is a Venn diagram. And probably the larger circle in that Venn diagram is just what do the users want? They will very clearly tell you. And sometimes they are wrong, so you do have to ignore them some of the time. Right. But a lot of the time, they're going to be very clear, like, oh man, it would be awesome if we had this. But I think there is also another part of the diagram that needs to be just what I want to create or just what I think would be cool. That is disconnected from what the player wants and is just like you're taking the players on an unexpected journey. Because if they get only what they asked for, then I think they're going to lose interest after a while.
Right. Oh, by the way, and I have one puzzle tip for people.
Ooh.
One of my, again, another mantra. And I've actually told my customers this, if a level looks hard, it's easier than it looks. If a level looks easy, it's harder than it looks. I constantly play with those notions. I want to shock them and surprise them, but also they want to, I want them to win. And by the way, people play my game, half people play my game untimed. The people that don't like the story, there's a toggle. You can just turn it off. I have now, I think 30 toggles in the game that they can go to. I have a nice little system where you pull up a screen, has all the toggles. You go on top of one of the toggles, it tells you what it is, and then you can click it on and off. And anything, I think of myself as being them as the player, right? They can review the whole story. They can go to the help book, pull down the story icon, and just read the whole story, even if they are still at first puzzle or second puzzle. Because I don't care. I used to put handcuffs on them way back in the first. I used to really be the fascist game designer. No, let them do it. And anything I did to review, like I wrote that so that I could review text easier when they did translations. I said, no, why don't I make it just so simple that the player themselves can read through the whole thing? Because I hated that in games too. You're halfway through the game and you go, what did he say at that first pop-up? They don't have that problem with my game. They can go find out.
Yeah, love that. Awesome. All right, before we are coming to the end of time. Before we run out of time, I want to do the question of the day. This is where we reiterate one of the most important things we learned from Joe. Audience, you need to type the correct answer in the chat, and the first person to do so will get 3 House Cup points. We play for the House Cup here at the Indie Game Academy. So the question is, what is the one piece of advice that Joe gave us some time ago? The metaphor he gave us for taking chances, we'll say, on your future self. Keep learning, lottery ticket of time. I'm going to give it to Color Optimist. Yes, take risks, learn something new, and think about it like you are signing yourself a lottery ticket. Those hours that you're putting into learning and developing is a lottery ticket that may pay off one day.
Right. And I didn't call it a lottery ticket, but when I was 7 years old, I have 3 brothers that were sports people, and I'm kind of not. And whenever they were ornery to me, sometimes I said out loud, but very rarely. But usually I thought it was, you can swim in my pool someday. And that's the gist of the lottery ticket of time is I'm going to use my time right now well, so I'm going to be better off than you or whatever. And I'm not as mean as I used to be, but proving people wrong is a great motivator.
I feel that too. I had so I went to business school, which was fine, I guess. And I remember one day in accounting, I was so bored, which maybe I should have paid better attention to accounting. It's an important one. But I was building a video game in class instead of paying attention. And I remember the people behind me, I could hear them whispering and making fun of me for making a video game. And that was like they weren't even that mean or anything, but for whatever reason, that is stuck in my mind. And anytime I make games, and especially when I make good money making games, I'm like, ha, who needed accounting anyway? Love it. All right.
Well, the CEO for iWin once told me, Joe, nobody's going to buy just a collection of puzzles. And that's what Clutter has finally evolved into with the Clutter Puzzle magazine.
Incredible. All right, so we are at the end of time for today. Before we say goodbye, Joe, what I usually ask for from our guest of honor is some homework. So what is a homework assignment you can give the listeners that they can do within the next week? So not too much time.
They should really go watch How to Succeed at Anything.
How to Succeed at Anything.
And then and feel free to email me questions and follow-ups or whatever. But I think anybody, high school, college, a couple years out, I think it was given to 100 people, and it was probably my best talk, which is why it's listed number 1. I mean, with the exception of a little mic problem here and there, I'm proud of the talk. I'm happy it conveyed. I ramble, as you know. The talk is more succinct. You would watch it and go, "Oh, this is so Joe," and it's better. It's better than this. What if you like this? That's better.
Is this the one from SimFest? Looking for the video for everybody.
Yep.
Okay. Awesome. Here it is, and we'll put a link to it
SimFest.
as well.
I don't think it says SimFest.
My bad.
It's
if
the
you grab
top
the link
one.
for us.
I am gonna do that.
We'll put it in the comments down below, or not in the comments, in the description down below for anybody who's listening.
Okay, here's a share. Hold on a second. Let's see. Share, and then I just copy link. Yeah, and how do I hate. How do I get to the chat?
So in the top right, there's a little talkie symbol.
Yep.
Yeah, little chat
symbol. I clicked on that.
Yep, and then you can drop it in the text box down below.
We hope this works.
For those who are listening, it'll be in the description. Yes.
That worked.
There we go. So that is your homework. Take a look at How to Succeed at Anything by Joe Casava. Write us some comments. Let us know what you think about it. You can tag us on LinkedIn. That's where we're going to be most reactive. And then, of course, you can come chat about it here in Discord. Before we say goodbye, is there anything that you want to plug, Joe, or any last words of wisdom you want to give listeners?
Well, the last piece is don't stop. So, for instance, a lot of people, trying to get better at games and do stuff. So they make a runner, or they make something that already exists. Don't stop there. After you've done it, go, can I make that better? And then maybe even 2 weeks later, you come back and go, what can I still make better? What more variation? What more fun? I'll leave you with one favorite one. I got so sick of hearing it's hard to find the fun in game dev. Hard to find the fun. Hard to find the fun. But you know what's not hard? Finding the not fun and staying the fuck away from it. Okay? Really. I came from an era where if somebody didn't understand something, they say, pop up a dialogue. No! Do not do that. You want to get your guy in the game immediately, like the hyper casuals on the phone, and let them have fun. And I don't know. That's it. As usual, I rambled.
That's totally good. I think following, I think just continuing to try is one of my greatest lessons to give, and I think everybody needs to do that. Just continue, keep at it. Keep polishing though. Even after you finish doing what you set out to do, go, especially with the game, go, can I make that better? Yeah. Iterate. It's the fundamental lesson of game design. I love it.
I've done it for 15 games.
15 games, and he's still innovating. And I think one of the things that I find most inspiring about your journey here, Joe, is that this is not like you didn't create World of Warcraft. You didn't create even a Stardew Valley. You created something nice and simple and repeatable that you found an actual player base for. And I think that in many ways is more inspiring than a Stardew Valley or World of Warcraft or whatever else.
Right. I didn't win the lottery for sure.
Yeah.
We're in a post-American Idol world where the story of the thing is often more important than the thing itself. This is one of the reasons I kind of hate GDC and stuff. Is you have the flavor of the month, the guy that created Threes or Wordle or whatever, and all their advice boils down to win the lottery like I did.
Yeah,
no,
I feel that.
You can. This was just one story of how I skinned the cat. to be sustained. I took very little risk. Even that first year, I had saved up, and I wasn't, selling my house or, so.
Amazing.
It was
all right.
It was an experiment worth doing. That's another way I look at things. Figure out an experiment to do and do it. Then you know something instead of just the conventional wisdom.
Amazing. All right. We are going to say goodbye. Don't leave just yet, Joe. I'm going to ask you a question after we stop recording.
Sure. Sure.
But we are going to wrap down for now. So, Joe, thank you for being here. Thank you for answering these questions. To those who asked questions, thank you for asking questions. And for those who are listening, thank you for listening. As always, we ask that you send this along to just one other person who you think may enjoy Joe's story to help us spread the word. All right. That's going to do it. Goodbye, everybody.